Welcome back to the deep dive. You know, we all have those documents sitting on our desktops, or let's be honest, in a cloud folder somewhere, that we know are important, but we just haven't had the time to really get into them.
Yeah, those dense technical blueprints and roadmaps.
Exactly. So what we do here is take those complex documents and, well, we turn them into a conversation, something clear, concise, and hopefully captivating.
And today we are diving deep into a really fundamental shift in corporate computing. We're moving beyond VDI, beyond those old physical desktops, and we're looking at how organizations are making Windows a true native cloud service with Windows 365.
It's more than just an upgrade, isn't it?
Oh, it's a complete architectural reset.
A reset is the perfect word, and that's what we're dissecting today. Our source is the Conceptual Reference Architecture designed by Kevin Kaminsky. Specifically, we're looking at the document W365 Design 1.0.docdocs. This thing is a blueprint. It shows exactly how a major enterprise is designing its migration and in the process shedding, decades of technical debt.
And our mission, really, is to pull out that essential technical roadmap for deploying this Cloud PC environment. We're going to focus on a very specific persona.
The information worker.
The information worker, exactly. Think of your standard office employee, the person who lives in Microsoft 365, uses web apps all day, and needs secure, reliable access from, well, anywhere.
Okay, so let's unpack that. If you are sitting down to build this ultimate cloud desktop, what are the core objectives? What's driving every single design decision in this document?
The whole design really rests on three, let's call them non-negotiable pillars.
Okay.
First is ubiquitous access. The PC has to follow the user, not the other way around. It needs to be true work from anywhere with a persistent, personalized desktop.
And second?
Modern security. We're talking about an architecture that is built from the ground up on zero trust principles. It has to be completely integrated with Microsoft Entra ID.
And the third piece must be management.
Simplified management, absolutely. The goal is to just eliminate complexity. You ditch legacy systems like group policy objects for this streamlined cloud-native administration using Microsoft Intune.
So if we boil all of that down, it really points to the core thesis of this whole document, which feels like a philosophical shift.
It is.
We are officially decoupling the operating system, Windows, from the physical hardware. We're not treating the PC like a fixed heavy box on a desk anymore.
Exactly. We're seeing it as a dynamic, scalable, and importantly, easily replaceable cloud service.
So it's the end of what we've been struggling with for so long, that image inertia.
That's a great way to put it. The Cloud PC is an elastic provisioned asset. You spin it up when you need it, you can resize it if the job changes, and you just delete it when the user leaves.
And that flexibility, I imagine, requires a complete rethink of how you handle identity, security, and especially data.
A total rethink. You have to start from scratch.
Okay, so let's start with the practical side of this decoupling philosophy. The document calls it the dynamic cloud PC. What does that actually mean for the person sitting down to do their work?
It means, first and foremost, total reliability and persistence. And this is a really crucial distinction from older VDI models.
Right, where you might get a random desktop from a pool.
Exactly. A non-persistent pool where your desktop resets every single time you log off. Here, the Cloud PC is a dedicated, persistent virtual desktop. It's assigned one-to-one with the user.
So just so I'm clear, whether I'm connecting from my old corporate desktop at the office or my personal iPad at home, or even some kiosk at a library, I'm going to see the exact same desktop with the exact same files right where I left them.
Precisely. That is ubiquitous access, realized. And because they were so focused on that information worker persona, the architects had to define a standard hardware baseline, something that meets productivity needs without, breaking the bank.
And what did they land on for that baseline spec?
The standard is 2 virtual CPUs, 8 gigs of RAM, and 128 gig standard SSD.
Okay, 2 vCPUs, 8 gigs of RAM. That feels pretty standard for productivity work.
Right. It's optimized for users whose main tools are the M365 suite, video conferencing, web browsing. It's all about responsiveness for those common tasks.
But I have to pause on that storage. 128 gigabytes. That's small for a corporate machine. Feels like a very intentional constraint.
Oh, it is. It's more than just a technical spec. You can think of it as a policy enforcement mechanism.
How so?
That 128 gig size, which also happens to be the minimum disk size for some system configurations, it sends a very strong signal to both users and IT that data is not supposed to live on the local C drive.
So it forces the issue.
Forces the architectural need for what we'll talk about later, data externalization. If they gave everyone a 512 gig drive, users would just naturally hoard files locally, and that completely undermines the goal of having a disposable, replaceable asset.
That makes perfect sense. Okay, let's move into what I think is probably the most disruptive part of this whole architecture, the identity transformation. We're talking about getting rid of legacy domain dependencies completely.
Correct. The absolute foundation of this design is what the document calls the cloud-first mandate. Every single Cloud PC, no exceptions, has to be Entra ID joined.
So it's a mandatory, non-negotiable prerequisite.
It is. For all management, for all authentication, we are cutting the cord from the traditional on-prem directory.
But so many organizations default to hybrid Entra ID join. Why the strict preference for cloud only? Why make that complete break from Active Directory?
Well, the break from traditional AD, or even from hybrid, is a really strategic move. It's about eliminating points of failure and some major security risks. The document points to 3 primary benefits.
Okay, what's the first?
First, you completely remove the dependency on line-of-sight connectivity to your on-prem domain controllers.
Oh,
Yeah, think about the complexity that gets rid of. No more mandatory VPNs. No more having to set up express route tunnels just so a device can authenticate when someone's working from home. It simplifies the network topology dramatically.
so the networking headaches just vanish. What about the security side?
That's the second benefit, and you could argue it's even more critical. You reduce the massive attack surface that comes with those decades-old authentication protocols.
You mean things like NTLM and Kerberos?
Exactly. They were foundational to AD, but they are notorious for fueling lateral movement attacks. NTLM especially is so susceptible to relay attacks. By going purely to Entra ID, you standardize on modern authentication protocols that are just inherently more secure and can be tightly controlled by conditional access.
And the third benefit?
Simplicity and speed. When you're Entra ID joined, you eliminate the dependency on sync tools like Entra Connect that bridge on-prem AD to the cloud. This means you get faster, cleaner provisioning because the system isn't sitting around waiting for objects to sync or for attributes to reconcile.
Everything is just native to the cloud.
Exactly.
So Entra ID becomes the single absolute source of truth for the user's login and for the device's identity. Now, to make all this work, the architecture requires some specific Entra ID groups. How are those structured?
Yeah, you need 3 distinct groups for this whole thing to operate seamlessly and automatically. First up is the Cloud PC user group.
Okay.
Membership in this group is the atomic trigger. You add a user here, and it immediately assigns the Cloud PC license, and it triggers the provisioning policy to actually build their desktop.
So that's automation defined purely by identity. What about managing the devices themselves after they're built?
That's the second group. A dynamic device group. Every Cloud PC provisioned in this architecture gets an automatic device name prefix. It's CPC, followed by an identifier.
I see.
Intune uses that prefix to automatically enroll the device into a dynamic group. This gives you zero-touch configuration. So when IT needs to target a policy, like a security update, they just target this CPC group, and only the Cloud PCs get it.
And the third group?
The third is the administrator group. This group is used for assigning administrative roles inside Intune, and this is crucial for managing local administrator rights on the Cloud PC itself.
And I'm guessing the document is pretty clear that these have to be pure cloud groups.
Oh, absolutely. It specifically states these groups must be Entra ID-based, not synchronized from Active Directory. It just reinforces that cloud-only approach at every level.
I also noticed a really strong governance constraint tied to identity here. The decision to explicitly block personal Microsoft accounts on the Cloud PCs. Why draw such a firm line?
That is a strict data governance and corporate hygiene measure. I mean, think about it. If a user could sign into their personal Microsoft account for OneDrive or Mail or the store, they create this massive data leakage risk.
Right, they could just sync corporate files to their personal cloud storage.
Exactly. Blocking personal accounts ensures that corporate data, whether it's a document, an email, some code, it can't be accidentally or intentionally moved to an unmanaged personal account. It keeps the Cloud PC a secure, corporate-managed island. The enforcement of that boundary is absolute.
Okay, that sets the stage perfectly for provisioning. So the identity is established, the user is in the group, the license is triggered. How does the system actually build and deliver this dynamic PC?
The whole process is, it's entirely automated. It's hands-off. The journey from adding a user to that Entra ID group, to the license being assigned, to the provisioning policy being triggered, that whole flow is the complete replacement for the legacy imaging process.
So you're replacing months of like MDT scripting and testing.
Yes, months of that. Testing, deployment cycles, all replaced with a few seconds of identity management.
And that must mean they're not using those complex golden images that are packed with custom scripts and apps.
Absolutely not. The architecture makes a very clean break from that old thick image strategy. To maximize agility, supportability, and, update speed, the design relies on Microsoft optimized gallery images.
So just the stock image from Microsoft.
The baseline is the stock, perpetually supported Windows 11 Enterprise 25H2. This strategy ensures they get security enhancements instantly. And since Microsoft 365 apps are often pre-installed, it dramatically speeds up that day one readiness for the user. The IT team just no longer owns the operational burden of building and maintaining custom OS images.
And finally, what about the network? In this initial deployment phase, since they've ditched the domain controllers, how are these Cloud PCs talking to the outside world?
For this initial pilot, they use the Microsoft-hosted network, and this is a brilliant move for rapid deployment and for adopting zero trust right out of the gate.
Why is that?
It removes all the infrastructure complexity for the organization. They don't have to worry about managing Azure Virtual Networks, setting up complex VPNs, or configuring ExpressRoute. The connection path is secured by Microsoft's own backbone, and the organization can immediately focus on securing the access via conditional access rather than securing the underlying network pipes.
It's infrastructure simplification built right in.
Exactly.
All right, so we know who the user is. We know the device is provisioned in the cloud. Now the entire security model has to flip, right?
Yeah.
It's not about securing a physical perimeter anymore. It's about securing access.
That's the core of zero trust.
And the architecture doc defines conditional access, or CA, as the primary security layer.
Correct. Conditional access is the intelligent gatekeeper. It's constantly evaluating trust before it grants any access. And what really elevates this design is that they don't just apply CA once when you log in. The policy applies at two critical stages to maintain that continuous security.
Okay, tell me about these two gates. I want to understand how they work together to create that perimeter.
So Gate 1 is all about protecting access to the Windows 365 service itself. The user, and it doesn't matter if they're connecting from their phone, a managed corporate laptop, or a thin client.
Right.
They have to successfully authenticate using Entra ID first. This is where you enforce things like multi-factor authentication, location checks, and so on. If the user fails that check, they don't even get to see their desktop.
That makes sense. That's pretty standard identity protection.
Yeah.
But what about Gate 2? This happens after the user is already logged into their Cloud PC.
Gate 2 is what protects the corporate resources that the Cloud PC is trying to access. This is where the magic of being Entra ID joined really comes into play.
How so?
Once you're inside the Cloud PC itself is a managed, trusted device identity in Entra ID. So when that Cloud PC tries to access sensitive data, like a document in SharePoint or a private app, conditional access steps in again and reevaluates the Cloud PC's device compliance status, which it gets from Intune.
Okay, so let's run a quick scenario. I, the user, I log into my Cloud PC successfully. Gate 1 is passed. But then, let's say some malware sneaks past my defenses and it disables the antivirus on my Cloud PC.
Perfect example. Intune would immediately report that device as non-compliant.
Okay.
So when that now non-compliant Cloud PC tries to open a company document in SharePoint, conditional access Gate 2 intercepts that request, sees the Cloud PC is unhealthy, and it blocks access to the data until that compliance issue is fixed.
I see. So that's how they make sure the managed asset is trusted. It prevents a compromised Cloud PC from being used as a launchpad for data theft, even if the user who logged in had perfectly strong credentials.
Trust has to be continuously earned, even inside the session.
That is the definition of zero trust in action.
It really is.
Okay, let's pivot to the principle of least privilege.
Hmm.
This is so critical for reducing the attack surface. The document seems absolutely firm on the default state of the user.
And this is where I think IT managers are going to rejoice. Standard information worker users are provisioned without local administrator rights. This is non-negotiable.
That's a huge win.
It's massive. If you remove local admin rights, you immediately prevent unauthorized software installs, you block most forms of malware from getting deep system access, and you significantly reduce system instability from users changing things.
It just eliminates that constant fight against configuration drift.
Mm.
But IT staff, they still need admin rights for support.
Yeah.
So given that we don't have legacy DPOs or domain controllers, how are they dynamically managing administrative privilege for IT folks?
This is a perfect demonstration of the cloud-native model. Administrative privileges are managed dynamically through Microsoft Entra ID group memberships.
That third group we talked about.
Exactly. The IT department defines specific Entra ID groups. Those groups are then linked via a dedicated Intune configuration profile that says, okay, any member of this Entra ID security group should be a member of the local administrators group on the Cloud PCs.
So there's no manual adding of users, no complex scripting. An IT staff member gets added to the Entra ID group, and Intune just makes sure they become a local admin on all the Cloud PCs via that policy.
Precisely. And the moment they're removed from that Entra ID group, Intune revokes that administrative access instantly.
It's fully secured, it's auditable, and it's all role-based.
Right. And it's important to note, the architecture sticks to this simple, robust mechanism. It intentionally avoids adding complexity, like third-party tools or time box elevation methods. The goal is simplicity, because that enhances security and makes auditing straightforward.
That model really simplifies the whole admin lifecycle.
Hmm.
Now, what about hardening the device itself? How does the architecture make sure the underlying OS is configured to resist attacks?
It mandates the enforcement of Microsoft's recommended security baselines, and these are delivered entirely through Intune.
So no more building settings manually.
No, using the baselines is so much faster and more reliable than trying to custom build every single security setting by hand. It ensures the OS and the apps meet the latest industry standard security posture right from day one.
And are there any specific deep-level security features they're activating? Things that rely on modern hardware?
Yes, they're activating features that leverage virtualization-based security, or VBS, which uses the hypervisor to create these secure memory enclaves.
Like Credential Guard.
Key among them is Credential Guard. It isolates authentication secrets, those tokens that prove your identity, inside a secure, virtualized container. This makes them incredibly difficult for even sophisticated malware to steal, effectively stopping common attacks like pass the hash.
That's absolutely crucial for protecting the identity system we just spent all this time building.
It is. They also enforce Secure Boot, which makes sure only trusted signed components can load during the startup process. It's a fundamental defense against rootkits and boot-level malware.
And the active defenses.
Of course. Microsoft Defender Antivirus is mandated for its real-time, cloud-delivered threat intelligence, and the Windows Defender Firewall is enforced via Intune to apply granular host-level traffic filtering.
So every Cloud PC gets its own network segmentation.
That's a key part of their zero-trust strategy, yes.
We've established that Intune is the sole authoritative engine for management. When you get rid of legacy tools like Configuration Manager, scripting, GPOs, what is the most significant piece of technical debt that IT staff get to ditch?
Oh, it's the sheer complexity and fragility of GPOs and those old imaging scripts. I mean, think about the years IT has spent maintaining group policy objects that had conflicting settings that required local domain controller access.
And had registry tweaks that nobody remembers why they're there.
Exactly. The strategy explicitly discards all of those pre-existing GPO settings, and it avoids migrating old, complex PowerShell scripts.
So you're just leaving all that technical debt behind.
You are. Every time an app updated, IT had to worry about breaking some obscure GPO setting. Now, Intune uses modern standards like configuration service providers, CSPs, and the settings catalog. These are internet-first declarative management standards. IT is no longer debugging some ancient VBS script that depends on a specific map drive that only exists when the VPN is connected.
They're building a unified, cloud-native administration experience that just works over the internet.
Exactly.
So Intune is handling the configuration and the security baselines. How does this clean, thin-image approach handle application delivery?
They use a really sophisticated, three-tiered modern application delivery model. It's designed for maximum efficiency while still sticking to that least privilege principle.
Okay, so tier 1, image-based.
Right. These are the heavy hitters, the core productivity tools. We're talking Microsoft 365 apps and the Edge browser. They are included directly in that Microsoft optimized gallery image.
So the user's ready to work on day one.
Instantly. It reduces bandwidth demands, it cuts down provisioning time, because the biggest applications are already there before the user even logs in for the first time.
Okay, tier 2, Intune Win32. These must be the required utilities that aren't quite standard enough to be baked into the main image.
Correct. Required utilities like, say, 7-Zip or the crucial remote help application for IT support, those are packaged as .intune win files. They get automatically pushed and installed by the Intune management extension right after provisioning.
And the document mentioned there's some work involved there.
Yeah, it highlights the diligence required. IT has to make sure those packages have silent install and uninstall logic and robust detection rules, so Intune knows if the app actually installed successfully or not. The workload shifts from manual installation to careful packaging.
And then there's Tier 3, self-service. This has to be the biggest change for user autonomy.
It fundamentally reduces the help desk workload. Optional or less common apps, like VLC Player, for example, they're placed in the company portal.
And the user can just go grab them.
They can. And crucially, because these are packaged and delivered by Intune, users can install these approved applications on demand without needing local admin rights. It reinforces that least privilege model while still giving the user back some control.
Okay, this handles the initial setup. But the biggest struggle for any IT department isn't the deployment. It's the continuous servicing of that environment. How does this architecture handle the relentless pace of Windows as a service?
They tackle that with evergreen servicing via Windows Auto Patch. This service is designed to remove the entire manual burden of Patch Tuesday from the IT staff's shoulders. Auto Patch automates the whole update orchestration process for the OS and the core M365 apps.
Walk me through what AutoPatch is actually managing. What's in its scope?
It covers three essential components. First, Windows updates themselves. Second, Microsoft 365 apps, and it specifically targets the stable and recommended monthly enterprise channel. And third, the Edge browser on the stable channel. AutoPatch makes sure all of these are updated continuously and cohesively.
So how does it mitigate the risk of a bad patch taking down the whole company?
Yeah.
That used to be the nightmare of every IT department.
It uses a really scientifically managed progressive rollout through rings. You have test, fast, and broad.
Okay.
Updates are first deployed to a small group of test users, and they're monitored very closely for health and performance metrics. If it passes, it moves to the fast ring, which is a larger group, and then finally to the broad ring, the majority of users.
And the key safeguard is the monitoring.
Yes. The service's monitoring capability is key. AutoPatch actively monitors update health and can automatically pause or roll back deployments if it detects widespread regressions or issues. It catches problems long before that bad update ever reaches most of your users.
So it turns patch management from this high-risk manual job into a monitored, automated risk mitigation service.
Exactly. It frees up the IT staff from doing the manual work and lets them focus on the exceptions that the system flags for them.
Now, you mentioned something fascinating earlier, the servicing of the management platform itself. Intune isn't a static product, it's a service.
This is a critical shift in operational philosophy. The entire ecosystem, Windows, M365, the Intune management layer, it's all a management as a service model. It's constantly evolving. Intune gets monthly updates that introduce new configuration capabilities, new security features, new policy options.
Which means the architecture itself is fluid, not static.
That has to be.
So IT is basically governing an environment that is perpetually receiving feature updates. What does the architecture document say about how IT has to adapt to that constant state of change?
It requires a proactive rhythm. IT teams have to continuously review the service changes, which are primarily documented in the Microsoft 365 Message Center, so they can exploit new features and make sure their current architecture stays best in class. If you ignore the monthly service changes, you risk running an outdated environment built on last month's best practices.
The governance process is no longer an annual review, it's continuous.
It has to be.
Let's move into the user's world, starting with what has to be the single most important question. What about my data? If the Cloud PC is a dynamic asset that can be deleted and rebuilt at any time, reprovisioned, how do you make sure my work is safe and persistent?
It's a great question. If the PC is disposable, then the data has to be externalized. The design mandates a really robust data externalization strategy to ensure that user files and preferences persist completely independently of that virtual disk.
And what are the two essential technologies they rely on to make that happen?
First, and this is non-negotiable, is OneDrive Known Folder Move, or KFM. KFM automatically redirects the user's three most critical personal folders, desktop, documents, and pictures, straight to their OneDrive for Business.
So files are just continuously synced to the cloud.
Continuously. And they're instantly available if the user logs into a brand new, freshly provisioned Cloud PC. The second piece is Enterprise State Roaming, or ESR. This handles all the modern personalization settings, your themes, your Edge favorites, app preferences. It makes sure the user's look and feel persists, which completes the illusion that they are still on the same dedicated machine.
And that seamless data persistence must support the recovery strategy too.
Yeah.
If a Cloud PC gets corrupted, The user doesn't actually lose their data.
Absolutely. KFM handles the data, and the Cloud PC service itself handles the operating state. The service is configured to automatically take point-in-time restore snapshots of the entire virtual desktop state every 12 hours.
Okay, every 12 hours. And how many do they keep?
They retain the last 10 restore points. This is a really powerful safety net, and the key user benefit here is that the service allows for self-service restores. Users don't need to call the help desk, they can just roll back their machine state themselves.
That is a massive win for user autonomy, and it must reduce the IT burden significantly. Okay, let's talk about the day one experience from an interface perspective. Are they applying a huge amount of customization to the desktop?
No, actually, minimalism is the goal. The design uses the default Windows 365 layout. It prioritizes a really orderly, predictable baseline. There's only one intentional change to the interface.
And what's that?
The Microsoft Store is unpinned from the taskbar. That's it. It just reduces clutter and accidental user clicks, but the store services themselves remain active in the background for system maintenance and for that modern app delivery we talked about.
But again, if everything is centrally managed, how do they avoid that classic VDI frustration where a user customizes their taskbar or their start menu, and then a policy sync later that day just wipes out all their personalization?
They handle that with what they call apply once configuration logic. The initial configuration profile dictates that corporate layout on day one. But after that initial provisioning, the user can personalize their start menu and taskbar freely.
So the policy won't overwrite their changes later.
It won't. The configuration policy will not overwrite those changes on subsequent syncs. And this is so critical for fostering a sense of user ownership. IT establishes the baseline, but the user owns the ongoing look and feel. It prevents that dreaded feeling of being a temporary guest on your own machine.
Okay, we've saved probably the most controversial section for last. The critical data boundary controls. This is what defines the line between the secured, managed cloud PC and the unmanaged physical device the user is connecting from.
Which could be a personal laptop, a tablet, anything.
An untrusted PC, even. This is where security often have a head-on collision with convenience.
It's the highest stakes trade-off in the whole architecture. The design specifies very intentional configurations for 3 key data transfer channels between the Cloud PC session and that local endpoint.
All right, let's start with the channel they decided to enable for productivity. Clipboard redirection.
Yes, clipboard redirection is enabled. This allows users to copy and paste text and images between their local device and the Cloud PC session. For the information worker, this was considered absolutely essential for basic productivity.
But there's still a risk there.
There is, but the risk is managed because it's mostly text-based. The architects decided that the productivity gain here outweighed that low-level risk.
Okay, now for the constraints. First, printer redirection is explicitly disabled. Why take away such a basic function?
Printer redirection is blocked, and the rationale is really twofold. First, it eliminates the enormous operational complexity of managing printer drivers on the Cloud PC. Tunneling local printer drivers into a virtual session is notoriously fragile and a massive source of help desk tickets.
I can believe that.
Second, and this is more important for security, it closes a data leakage path. The document implicitly trusts only cloud-managed printing. So if an employee needs to print, the architecture steers them toward a secure alternative like Microsoft Universal Print, which works over the cloud and maintains that security boundary.
I get the driver nightmare, but blocking the final channel file redirection or drive mapping, that feels like a design decision that's right for user rebellion. If I have a file on a USB stick or my local desktop, I can't just drag it into my Cloud PC session. How do you sell that productivity hit to users?
This is the definitive security choice of the entire architecture. It is pure zero trust enforcement. File redirection or drive gapping is explicitly blocked. This means local drives, USB sticks, your local C drive, they do not appear as mapped resources inside the Cloud PC session.
That must have been a difficult decision to justify.
It's justified by closing 2 major high-impact security vectors. First, it prevents the data exfiltration of corporate data to unmanaged local storage. If you can't map the drive, you can't accidentally or intentionally drag a proprietary file from SharePoint onto your personal, unprotected laptop.
Okay, that makes sense. And the second vector?
Equally critical, it prevents the lateral movement of malware. If a user's personal laptop is infected with ransomware, blocking drive mapping prevents that malware from being able to traverse the session and potentially encrypt files stored within the secure Cloud PC environment.
Wow, so the Cloud PC is intentionally completely isolated. If you want to transfer a file, you have to use an approved, monitored, audited channel like OneDrive or SharePoint.
Yes, it forces good data hygiene by removing that convenient but totally unsecured path.
It's a high friction point for the user, no doubt.
It is, but it provides the highest level of security assurance that the corporate data and the Cloud PC environment remain pristine, regardless of the security posture of the physical endpoint they're using to connect. It's a necessary trade-off for real zero-trust isolation.
This conceptual architecture, this W365 Design 1.0.docs document, it feels like it's more than just a technical blueprint. It's really a statement about the future direction of enterprise IT.
I would agree with that.
If we synthesize everything we've covered, what are the three core pillars that really define the transformation that's laid out here?
I think we've seen a pretty radical shift that's defined by three pillars. First, cloud-native identity. Entra ID, join, and conditional access completely replace the complexity and the security risk of legacy Active Directory. Second, unified evergreen management. Intune, combined with Windows Autopatch, replaces all that outdated GPO management, custom imaging, and manual patching. It shifts IT from execution to orchestration.
And the third.
A strong, enforced data boundary. KFM ensures the data persists, while blocking drive and printer redirection ensures total security against exfiltration and lateral malware movement.
The primary value for the organization, for the IT manager listening to this, is really realizing how automation and strong identity fundamentally replace infrastructure dependency and all that manual high-risk effort.
Right. This architecture isn't just about faster deployment. It's about removing the call center tickets complaining about system instability. That's the true ROI.
The role of the IT staff changes completely.
It does. They are no longer responsible for maintaining the physical integrity of machines. They're focused solely on monitoring compliance, refining policies, and integrating business services. It's a much more strategic position.
And here is where it gets really interesting, and it presents the next layer of the challenge. We've established that the entire platform, Intune, Edge, Windows, M365, it all receives constant rolling updates through this management as a service model. We are living in a continuous feature release environment.
The operational reality is that you are governing a permanent beta state. You cannot stop that monthly flow of updates.
So given this constant evolution and the need to proactively review service changes in the message center every single month, the final provocative thought we want to leave you with is this. What structural changes does an IT team need to make to their change management framework, their governance procedures, to successfully monitor, validate, and incorporate new Intune and Windows features every month without causing environmental instability? This level of continuous change demands a fundamentally different, proactive, and rapid operational rhythm than the slow, deliberate process that traditional IT teams are used to.
Governing a system that perpetually reinvents itself, that is the next great frontier for cloud architecture. You have to bake change management into your daily operational DNA.
An excellent challenge to ponder as you look at your own cloud roadmap. That's all the time we have for this deep dive. Thank you for exploring the future of the enterprise desktop with us.
We hope this provided you with the clarity and insight you need to tackle the complexity of modern IT transformation.
See you next time.